MTN News. This is Face the State 2020 Vote, the race for Secretary of State.
Good morning and welcome to this week's special edition of Face the State on the Montana Television Network. I'm Mike Dennison, MTN's chief political reporter. This week we continue with our series of debates for candidates running for statewide office. This week we're bringing you the candidates running for Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is the chief elections officer of Montana. The office also handles business registration documents. The candidates joining us today are Democrat Bryce Bennett and Republican Christy Jacobson. Thanks to both of the candidates for joining us. Let's hear more about them. Bryce Bennett is a state senator from Missoula and a fifth-generation Montanan who grew up in Hysham. He's been in the legislature for 10 years, where he's focused on protecting health care for Montanans, fighting the influence of dark money in elections, privacy issues, and strengthening ethics laws. He spent 7 years leading Montpur, a nonprofit group that works on consumer protection and other progressive causes. Christy Jacobson is the current Deputy Secretary of State. She was born and raised in Helena, graduated from Carroll College, and has a master's degree in public administration from the University of Montana. She began her career in the telecom industry working for US West and worked for the State Department of Justice before joining the Secretary of State's office in 2017. She and her husband, Eric, have 5 children. Thanks again to both of you for joining us. And just a word about the format before we begin. We'll ask questions directly to the candidates. They will each get 1 minute to answer. The other candidate will get 30 seconds to rebut. And also in the middle of the debate, the candidates will each get a chance to ask the other candidate a question. And the first question goes to Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, the Secretary of State is an office I think a lot of people don't really know that much about. Why should people care who is Secretary of State, and why should you be the one that they choose?
Well, thank you for the question, Mike, and thank you as well to Ms. Jacobson for joining us here today. I've spent my career working with Republicans and Democrats to get things done for Montana. Those are the values that I grew up with, coming from a small town in eastern Montana. But I got to tell you, those are not the values that I see in today's Secretary of State's office. I see an office that is led by my opponent that has been plagued with corruption and incompetence, whether it's giving out big government contracts to some of their biggest donors, corruptly using state-owned vehicles, or even hiring her own family members into the office. This office has really become a mess. I've got a lot of experience cleaning up messes, whether it's passing sweeping ethics reform or making sure that dark money doesn't have the final say in our elections. As Secretary of State, I will make sure that we protect access to our public lands. I was recognized by the Montana Chamber of Commerce for standing up for the needs of small businesses. And that's the sort of bipartisan leadership that got me the endorsement of former Republican Secretary of State, Bob Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Ms. Jacobson, I'm sure you'd like to rebut that.
Thank you, Mike. I'm a wife and a mother, and I'm the mother of a soldier. And I have the education and the experience to properly lead Montana elections. I have all of the Montana values. And in the last 3 years, we've downsized government, hiring the very best people in our office. I'm very proud of the workforce that we have. My opponent is anti-gun, anti-life, and anti-business. He has an F rating from the NRA, an F rating from Commerce.
We'll let you continue a little bit later on. Now, my next question to you is a similar question. Why should we upgrade your position from deputy to the Secretary of State office? What have you done in that office, and what will you continue to do that warrants your election?
Thank you for the question, Mike. In the last 3.5 years, we've hired the best and the most competent staff. We have a very high level of employee engagement, and we reduced our staff by 1/3. We've gone from 60 employees to 40. We've reduced our customer wait times. When businesses call in, when we first took office, they were on hold for up to 2 hours. Now we answer the phone within 30 seconds or less. We offer our businesses to register 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we've modernized our business registry. We've been the first in the country to do that, and I'm very proud of the work our office has done in the last 3.5 years. I will continue to operate and have efficiencies and savings and keep our business filings the very lowest in the country, keeping out bureaucracy and red tape.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobson.
Thank you.
Mr. Bennett, your rebuttal.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mike. Unfortunately, that's just not the reality that I'm hearing from business owners from across the state. You know, when she talks about downsizing, what I've heard from them is that they've gutted the office. They've made it harder for folks to get their questions answered, and it's harder for Montana businesses to get registered or continue on and keep growing in this tough economy. We need somebody there that's going to fight every day to make sure that our businesses can get in, get out, and get on with their day, and I will cut the red tape that has been created by this office.
Thank you. The next question goes to Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, as a legislator, you have sponsored several bills to make it easier for people to vote. Is that a goal of yours, to make it easier for people to vote? Why is that something we should be trying to achieve?
I think that every eligible Montana voter should have their voice heard in our democracy. I think we need to make sure that our democracy works for everybody and that we're not leaving people out on election day who are qualified to have their voices heard. But my opponent has pushed an agenda that would make it harder and harder for everyday working class Montanans to have their voices heard. I think we need to push back on these voter suppression attempts and make sure that this is an office that talks with everybody, and no matter who you are, where you come from, or how you cast your ballot, or who you're voting for, you get a chance to have your voice heard on election day.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Ms. Jacobson, your response.
Mike, in all of Montana, we have such a special state here, and we have a high level of voter turnout. Montanans take their civic duty very seriously, and that's why we have such a high level of participation. Montanans value their voice to be heard, and that's why our voter turnout is so high. I will continue to fight to allow people that want to vote in person have that ability. And the only voter suppression going on is from my opponent, who's pushing for all mail ballots on reservations and trying to take away the right for people to vote in person. We need to keep Montana special and not turning it into California or Colorado.
Thank you. The next question goes to Ms. Jacobson. Ms. Jacobson, in some of your campaign material, you said that Mr. Bennett and Democrats, if they're in control of the office, would turn a blind eye to voter fraud, to quote unquote cheat in elections. I'm just wondering, what evidence do you see of voter fraud in Montana, or what evidence do you have to back up that claim?
Thank you for the question. I support voter integrity and clean and fair elections, and I will continue to fight for clean and fair elections in Montana. Montana is a very special place, and we have to continue to uphold the integrity of the elections of Montana and to continuously improve anything that would take away or chip away at the integrity of that. My opponent wants to automate online voter registration. That's something I continue to oppose, and that it would prevent any type of fraud to seep in and again change our state from turning into California or Colorado.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobson. Mr. Bennett, your response.
Well, my opponent is misleading folks about my record, and it seems like that's what her campaign has been built on. My record is about making sure that our elections have the highest integrity, because I know that Montanans expect that. My opponent has been caught asleep at the wheel when it comes to the security of our elections. You will not have to drag me kicking and screaming to use the National Guard cybersecurity unit or bring in experts from the private sector to make sure that no hacker can get into our election infrastructure. We want to make sure that we've got people that have the experience of going toe-to-toe with the people who are trying to sneak into our system and undermine people's integrity in our elections.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Now we come to the part of the debate where the candidates get to question each other one time. The first one, Ms. Jacobson, will pose a question to Mr. Bennett. Ms. Jacobson.
Mr. Bennett, why are you anti-American and stand and advocate to defund the police?
Mr. Bennett.
Oh, Mike, I got to tell you, the endless amounts of lies that come from my opponent in this race are just galling at this point. I have never said that, and she knows it. But if she wants to spend the next 30 minutes lying about my record, she's welcome to do that. I want to talk about the issues that matter to the people of Montana. And I absolutely understand why she would bring up lies like this, because her record is one of leading an office that has been plagued by corruption and incompetence. It is an office that has given away government contracts to her biggest political donors, hired her own family members into this office, corruptly abused our state-owned vehicles, and even wasted hundreds of thousands of dollars of our own money on a voter guide that she botched. I mean, the problems are endless in this office, and she knows that Montanans, when they hear my message of protecting access to our public lands, having strong elections, and making sure that our businesses have the tools to succeed, they're going to choose me.
Ms. Jacobson, your response.
Mr. Bennett is anti-business, anti-life, anti-gun, and he's no friend to the ag community. I will stand on the merits of my qualifications and experience to lead the office and the elections and the Secretary of State, and he can stand on his terrible voting record.
Thank you. Now, the next question goes from Mr. Bennett to Ms. Jacobson. Mr. Bennett, your question.
Yes, Ms. Jacobson, for 4 years, you've overseen an office plagued by incompetence and corruption. From giving out sweetheart contracts to partisan donors, costing us taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars because you botched Montana's voter guide, and handing out voter or government jobs to your own family members. How can Montanans trust that if you are elected, it won't just be another 4 years of the same incompetence and corruption?
In the last 3 years, we've reduced staff from 60 to 40 employees, reducing staff by a third. We've saved millions of dollars. We've gone from 4 rent locations to 1. We even bailed out the governor by $500,000 of our savings when he overspent his budget. I will continue to lead the office and to fight for clean and fair elections. Unlike you, who wants to liberalize our elections and turn Montana into California.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobson. Mr. Bennett, your response.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mike, because I know that my opponent would love to be running against somebody from California, but I'm a 5th-generation Montanan. I've lived in this state my whole life. I'm so proud of it. I'm proud of the work that I've done to bring Republicans and Democrats together to get things done for the state. That's the record I have. And my opponent didn't answer the question because she knows that everything I said is true. And we cannot afford to have another 4 years of that kind of leadership in this office.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. The next question goes to Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, do you support electronic voter registration? Why or why not?
I think that we need to look at all opportunities to keep our elections secure and transparent and honest for the people of Montana. I think that there are a number of different tools that we can look at when it comes to online voter registration or automatic voter registration, tools that are used in some of the most right-wing states out there. It's just about making sure that no matter who you are, where you come from, or who you're going to vote for, you have a chance that every eligible Montanan gets a chance to have their voices heard when it comes to Election Day.
Thank you. Ms. Jacobson, your rebuttal.
Mike, thank you for the opportunity. California adopted automatic online voter registration, exactly what my opponent is trying to do, and that's to turn Montana into California. Montana is unique and needs to oppose automatic online voter registration. California adopted that, and it was an absolute train wreck. My opponent wants to turn Montana into California. This has to be stopped.
Thank you. Next question goes to Ms. Jacobson. Ms. Jacobson, I'm wondering if you are supportive of the lawsuit recently filed by the Trump campaign, National Republicans, and the State Republican Party to block Governor Bullock's order that allowed counties to choose all mail ballots in Montana for the general election.
Mike, we
do you support that
continue.
or not? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, we continue to operate with lawsuit after lawsuit in our office. And my only goal is to do exactly what the law requires the Secretary of State's office to do.
And so are you saying you support or not on that lawsuit as far as its efforts to stop the governor's order?
We've had about 12 different lawsuits and complaints in the last 3.5 years. And again, my role as the next Secretary of State is to uphold the law and enforce what we are required to do by state law.
Mr. Bennett, your response.
Thank you, Mike. I'll say what my opponent is afraid to say, is that this is partisan politics at its absolute worst. No Montanan should have to choose between their health and casting a ballot, but that's exactly what these DC partisan operatives want. They want to pull the rug out from underneath our county clerks and recorders who are working so hard to make sure that we have strong, secure elections. With less than 30 days left until Montanans start voting, they're going to pull the rug out from these folks and make them throw out the plans that they've created to make sure the Montanans stay healthy. I would love to see us lead on this issue.
The next question goes to Mr. Bennett. Let's talk a little bit about the land board. The Secretary of State is one of 5 statewide officers who sits on the land board and decides policy on state lands. As you may know, in the past, the legislature, some parts of the legislature have expressed reluctance or some criticism of the state buying large tracts of lands or ranches to add to state lands. What is your position? Do you think that we should be buying more state tracts of land to increase public access or not? Is it a good idea for us to be a competitor out there in this private real estate market?
Yeah, I grew up swimming in Flathead Lake, hiking up Pompey's Pillar, and exploring the areas outside of my grandpa's hunting cabin outside of Zortman. These public lands are very special to me, and any attack on them is something that's incredibly personal. That's why in the legislature, I pushed legislation that would put heavy fines on out-of-staters that put up gates and barbed wire to try to keep the rest of us out of our public lands. That's why I fought back against the special interests who are supporting my opponent's campaign, who want to see these areas sold off to the highest bidder. We simply can't have that. And I got to tell you, it was very concerning for me when a reporter asked my opponent what her vision for the land board was, and she simply said that she wasn't well versed on what the land board even did. So I have to ask, how can we expect somebody to be able to protect access to the public lands that we all own if they don't even know what the job is?
Ms. Jacobson, your response, please.
Thank you, Mike. I grew up in Montana and I've enjoyed public lands. And the purpose of the land board is actually to generate revenue for our schools. And the land board members are entrusted with managing the public lands to generate money for our schools. Schools that I attended, public schools that our 5 kids attended, and to properly fund our public schools. I'm a proponent of natural resource development along with public access to our public lands. I support agriculture, and I know it's the backbone of our state. And I would also support to make sure leases are not increased.
Thank you. The next question goes to Ms. Jacobson. You mentioned earlier in our show about business registration for the office. What has your office done to improve that process? And is there anything that you would change if you're elected as Secretary of State?
Mike, this is something that if it's not broke, don't fix it. And after 3.5 years, we have absolutely streamlined the business registry process. Businesses can file 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We were the first in the country to do that. I talk to businesses across the state, and they love what we've done. My opponent wants to create bureaucracy, double the staff, and go back to a dual system. We have an extremely streamlined system. And I've talked to businesses and they're very satisfied with it. And we've kept our business filings low. And I promised all businesses in Montana for the next 4 years, I will never increase business filings on any Montana business. And I will continue to make it easy for businesses to file and access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with top-notch customer service.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett, your response.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Mike. You know, my opponent continues to mislead about my record because she can't stand by hers. You know, the truth is that I was recognized by the Montana Chamber of Commerce because they know that I'll stand up for Main Street. And I know that our Main Street businesses, our farmers and our ranchers, like the folks that I grew up with in Eastern Montana, are struggling right now. And they need somebody that's going to make sure that you can get in, get out, and get on with your day when it comes to the Secretary of State's business office. I know that every single minute that somebody that is wading through the bureaucracy and red tape that my opponent has created is time they can't spend with their family and putting food on their family's table.
Thank you. The next question goes to Mr. Bennett. As you know, Mr. Bennett, this is a partisan office. If a voter isn't sure about the person, should they be voted by party? In other words, you know, what do we get in a Democrat in this office instead of a Republican?
Well, my record is bringing Republicans and Democrats together to get things done for Montana, and I'm incredibly proud of that. I have many bipartisan accomplishments, you know, whether it's protecting healthcare for 90,000 Montanans or working to keep dark money out of our elections. That's something that I've done by reaching across the aisle. It's the reason that I'm endorsed by both Democrat former secretaries of state like Linda McCullough, as well as Republican former Secretary of State Bob Brown. I mean, there's a lot of strong contrasts in this race. I mean, when it comes to the land board, you look at me, who's somebody that's going to provide for access for all of our hunters and anglers out there, and my opponent, who doesn't even know what the job is. You've got me, who's going to cut through the red tape that they've created over the last 4 years to make sure that our businesses are able to thrive and recover in the midst of this economy. And beyond that, you know, I'm the only one with a record of standing up to dark money, making sure that the only voice that matters on election day is you, the people of Montana. I'm proud of that record of bipartisan accomplishments, and that's what I'm going to bring to this office.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Ms. Jacobson, your response.
Unfortunately, my opponent is absolutely inexperienced and clueless when it comes to what the office actually does. The office doesn't regulate dark money, and if that's what he wants to do, he needs to apply for the job of the Commissioner of Political Practices. I stand for the values of life, pro-gun, pro-business, free enterprise. My opponent has an F rating from the NRA. The Chamber of Commerce gave him a score of 56%, and again, he's anti-life. We couldn't be further opposite.
Thank you. We have time for one more question that goes to Ms. Jacobson. Ms. Jacobson, you said that you support voter ID at the polls. Why do we need that? If someone is registered and they give their signature, why shouldn't that be enough?
Mike, I take it very serious, the integrity of our election system, and what we have here in Montana is so absolutely special. It needs to be protected, and it needs to be protected by somebody like me who has the experience and the Montana values to do so. I recently just lost my cell phone, went to replace it, and could not do it without a photo ID. It doesn't make sense to me that when we vote at the polls, there's no photo ID required. That's something that I look forward to partnering with the legislature at taking a look at and continuing to strengthen the integrity of our elections and keeping Montana so very special.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobson. Mr. Bennett, your response.
Thank you, Mike. My opponent knows just as well as I do that Montana has strong ID laws right now, and I will uphold those every step of the way. That is the job of the Secretary of State's office. But when it comes to the other areas of security that we're counting on the Secretary of State to lead on, they've been asleep at the wheel. They did not bring the National Guard on early enough to make sure that the integrity and safety of our elections was continued. I mean, they made sure that there was fewer opportunities for our county clerks and recorders to get the training and resources they need to keep our elections safe. That's something that's going to change on day one when I get there.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Now it's time for our closing statements. The first closing statement will go to Christy Jacobson.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all of Montana for watching and caring about this very important race. I'm Christy Jacobson. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm the mother of a soldier. I support our law enforcement. I have the education and the experience, and I possess the Montana values to properly lead Montana elections. Thank you and have a blessed day.
And now we go to Mr. Bennett for his closing statement.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you as well to Ms. Jacobson for joining me today. I appreciate the opportunity to share some ideas with you. I've spent my career working to get things done for Montana by working with both Republicans and Democrats. I protected access to healthcare for 90,000 Montanans and kept our rural hospitals open. I fought against the dark money that's poisoning our political system, and I've defended our public lands against the folks that want to put up gates and barbed wire to keep us out. That's the reason our campaign is endorsed by secretaries of state from both parties, like Democrat Linda McCullough and Republican Bob Brown. My opponent has given herself $115,000 to buy this election. We are building a grassroots campaign powered by Montanans in every corner of this state. We can't afford another 4 years of a Secretary of State who will vote against public access, make decisions that hurt Main Street, and create barriers between voters and their ballots to advance some sort of a political agenda. The stakes in this election are incredibly real. We've seen what happens when we have a Secretary of State who is more interested in themselves than helping the people of Montana. That's why I'm asking for your support, because together we can create a democracy where every voice is heard and every vote is counted, where the only voice that matters on election day is Montanans, where our businesses can get in, get out, and get on with our day, and access to our public lands and our favorite places to hike and hunt and fish and explore are always kept in public hands. That's the pledge that I'm making to you today, and that's why I'm asking for your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett, and I'd like to thank both Bryce Bennett and Christy Jacobson for joining us this morning for a very spirited debate, shall we say. Next week on Face the State, we'll have the candidates running for Attorney General as we continue our series of debates in statewide elections. Thanks again. I'm Mike Dennison.